Have you ever been in a situation where someone questions or criticizes your family, your beliefs, or your values, and you feel the weight of defending them? Now, imagine you're in a classroom, an environment built for discussion, debate, and learning, and the criticism comes from someone with authority, a professor. What do you do when your family is publicly criticized and you're caught in the spotlight? Do you stay quiet, get defensive, or take the opportunity to stand up for what you believe in? Well, that's exactly what happened when Barron Trump, the youngest son of former President Donald Trump, found himself in a classroom being publicly criticized by a liberal professor. But Barron's response wasn't just sharp. It left the entire room speechless. Let's take a closer look at how Barron handled this intense moment and what it teaches us about standing up for our values. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more stories that will leave you thinking. Today's video is all about a shocking classroom moment involving Barron Trump. Yes, you heard that right. Barron, who has kept a relatively low profile throughout his life, found himself caught in a tense moment when a professor targeted his family with harsh criticism. But Barron didn't just let the words slide. He responded in a way that stunned the entire room and left everyone in awe. This isn't just a story about a sharp comeback. It's a powerful lesson in how to stand firm and respond to criticism with integrity. Stick with me as we break down this unforgettable moment. It was an ordinary day at Barron Trump's school, a private institution known for fostering an environment of open dialogue and debate. Barron, who was focused on his studies and preferred to stay out of the limelight, was sitting in a history class. The subject of the day was political families in America, an academic discussion that would naturally touch on some of the most prominent political figures in history. The class was made up of students with varying viewpoints, and as the professor, known for his outspoken liberal views, began his lecture, it became clear that this lesson was not going to be a neutral one. As the professor began discussing the influence of political families, he used the Trump family as a prime example of how political dynasties can impact national policy. His criticism of the family's legacy, and specifically Barron's father, Donald Trump, was sharp and pointed. The Trump family, the professor said, has been one of the most divisive forces in modern American politics. From their inflammatory rhetoric to their controversial policies, they have done nothing but polarize the country. The students around Barron exchanged uncomfortable glances, knowing that some of them had strong opinions on the subject. But for Barron, who was quietly taking notes at the back of the room, it felt like a personal attack. He hadn't expected to be dragged into the debate, but there it was, his family, the very family he had grown up with, being criticized in a classroom full of students who probably didn't know him or his family as anything other than public figures. As the professor continued, his words grew more direct. It's hard to believe that anyone could look up to the Trump family, given their record, he said, and it's especially difficult to understand how someone like Barron Trump, growing up in that environment, could emerge unaffected by all the negativity surrounding him. At this point, Barron felt a heavy weight on his shoulders. The professor's words were no longer just about politics. They were about Barron personally. He had been singled out in front of his peers, and it felt like a challenge. The room grew quiet as the professor waited for a response from the class, and Barron could feel all eyes on him. He had two options: remain silent and let the criticism continue, or speak up and defend his family. With the tension building in the room, Barron did something unexpected. Instead of shrinking back or getting defensive, Barron calmly stood up from his seat. The professor, surprised that Barron was about to say something, paused. The class, which had been silent with anticipation, now held its collective breath. I understand that you have strong opinions about my family, but what you're saying isn't accurate, Barron began, his voice steady and clear. Just because you disagree with someone's politics doesn't mean you can judge their character. And just because I'm part of a family doesn't mean I adopt every viewpoint that's ever been expressed by its members. The professor, who had been expecting forcing Barron to either retreat or engage in a heated argument, was momentarily speechless. Barron's response was direct but measured. He wasn't arguing for the sake of winning. He was making a point that was rooted in truth and fairness. "I may have grown up in a family that holds certain beliefs," Barron continued, "but that doesn't mean I'm incapable of forming my own opinions. We all have our individual thoughts and voices, and just because I'm related to someone doesn't mean I automatically agree with everything they say or do." The room fell completely silent. The professor, once eager to continue his lecture, now found himself unsure of how to proceed. Barron had not only addressed the professor's comments, but he had done so in a way that demanded respect. His words weren't filled with anger or spite. They were calm, thoughtful, and true. He had reminded everyone in the room of an important lesson. It's easy to judge people based on preconceived notions, but we should always take the time to understand them as individuals. Barron's classmates, who had been watching the exchange unfold, now looked at each other in disbelief. Some were impressed by Barron's composure, while others seemed deep in thought. The professor, who had expected a back-and-forth argument, now found himself in a position of reflection. After a long pause, the professor finally nodded, acknowledging Barron's point. "You've made a valid point, Barron," he said, his tone softer than before. "I suppose I should remember that not everyone who comes from a certain background thinks the same way." As the class ended and the students filed out of the room, many of them continued to discuss what had just happened. Barron's calm and measured response had changed the atmosphere of the entire class. It was no longer about politics. It was about how we treat others and how we engage in dialogue, especially when we disagree. Some of Barron's classmates approached him after the class, expressing their admiration for how he had handled the situation. They were impressed not only by the content of his response, but by how he had managed to remain composed and articulate in the face of public criticism. So, what can we learn from Barron Trump's response? First and foremost, it's a reminder that strength doesn't always come from shouting the loudest or winning the argument. Sometimes, the strongest response is the one that's calm, composed, and rooted in truth. Barron didn't need to escalate the situation. He simply pointed out the flaws in the assumptions that had been made about him and his family. It's easy to get caught up in anger or defensiveness when we feel attacked, but Barron showed us that it's possible to stand firm and make a powerful point without resorting to hostility. He didn't defend his family by shouting or attacking back. Instead, he defended his integrity by speaking honestly and thoughtfully, and in doing so, he earned the respect of everyone in the room. This moment wasn't just about Barron Trump defending his family. It was about him defending the right to think independently, to not be defined by the actions or beliefs of those around us. It was a powerful example of how we can all navigate difficult situations with grace, thoughtfulness, and strength. Barron's words were a reminder that we should never judge others based solely on their affiliations, and that sometimes the quietest voice in the room can make the biggest impact. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.